Good morning, everybody, and I'm really happy that we can start our panel discussion with this very interesting topic. And I think we are very lucky to have been very well represented on the panel. We have representatives from the industry, from the CRO, and also from the agency. So I let the panel members introduce themselves. Mr. Chen.
Hello everyone, good morning. I'm Lin Chen Zhao from Taiwan FDA. I'm happy to hear, and it's very exciting for me. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Yamin Wang. I'm the head of global regulatory affairs for Asia Pacific at Bayer Healthcare Pharmaceuticals.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Alistair Davidson. I work in global regulatory development at PPD, based in the UK, and I have specific responsibility for our regulatory activities in Asia Pacific.
So before we start, I would like to do a little survey, if you don't mind. Can you raise your hand if you are from any health agency? Do we have any representative from a health agency? Anybody from academia? Is everybody from the industry? Raise your hand if you are from the industry. Is everybody from the industry? So we were just wondering whether we will get some other representative from the other Asian health authorities. So we have 3 topics to discuss, and I would like to start with the first one. And the first one basically is identifying areas for success for accelerated approvals. And actually, I would like to ask Alistair to talk about the key areas for success, and also how we can be successful from a CRO perspective, and also share some of the learnings and some of the best practices with you.
Okay, thank you, Krisztina. As you say, share tips and topics for success. And because I'm working in a CRO and also representing industry in my day-to-day work, it's easy to view this from one side, but regulatory success in respect of fast and smooth approval for clinical trials involves partnership between applicant and regulatory authority, and very much unlike the past or perception in the past, this feels much more like partnership now. It used to be in the past, it felt like them and us, but now everyone is together with the same broad target. So that's my first point. If I think about the tools you need for smooth and effective and predictable regulatory success in clinical trials, I think of 3 broad areas, and they are the areas of regulatory requirements, the regulatory process, and the timelines. If I think of, first of all, requirements, this is the toolbox that regulatory professionals is using to meet either the official requirements of the authorities or those requirements which are not official but has come about through practice over time, and sometimes what is published is not exactly what is required. More and more so, it's clearer, especially with more sophisticated authorities in Asia region, like China, Taiwan, Singapore, but the less sophisticated authorities, sometimes these requirements are not so clear. So you need to be very good at interpreting what is there. This can come partly through experience, but also partly through having regulatory people on the ground who have got a very good working relationship with the regulatory authority. I will come back to that point later. So that's the point on requirements, and then, success there is gained by effectively and efficiently communicating those requirements to the people who need to know. So on one side, it's possibly easy if you've got a good person in, say, Singapore who knows the requirements here, but they're often having to get the documents, the data, etc., to headquarters, or from their headquarters function, or from the sponsor if it's a CRO. So communicating what those requirements are and turning it into something meaningful for the deliverer of that requirement is another critical skill, and I will come back to that again. So that's number 1, the requirements. Number 2 is the process, and again, this is something which is over time becoming more and more published, more and more official, more and more formal from the regulatory authorities' point of view. So it's easier to see what is happening once your submission is made. To which committee does it go? How long does it sit in the queue? What about the process for answering questions? What about the process for delivering the final approval? Yet in some jurisdictions, this is still a little bit vague, and again, it falls on the regulatory professional to interpret this and to make a plan based on that. Then, of course, there's the internal process inside the company. This does not necessarily have to follow any mandated procedure, but a good, robust, consistent procedure to drive an efficient process is, of course, very desirable. And then the last point is the famous one of timelines, which is the one that regulatory professionals are constantly under from their colleagues in medical or commercial, or from the sponsor or whoever has got a vested interest in the end result. And again, there is official timelines, unofficial timelines, but probably the best is the timelines gained from experience, the timelines gained from looking at a wide range of approvals over a defined period in a defined country, maybe for a defined type of product or a defined type of study. So again, unlike in the past, there's a lot more data out there now. Authorities are publishing data, industry is pulling data, and from that data you can get a feel for what's really happening, and that should guide, of course, the stakeholders in the process. I think I will just stop there for a minute in case anyone wants to add something else.
I think we also have to acknowledge that Asia is diverse, so you cannot, one size doesn't fit all, and you have to be, as you said, it's not just the guidances and the regulations, but you need really good people who can interpret those, what they mean. And as you said, something is not in the written domain, but still you need somebody to explain how to do it most effectively.
Yes, and there are broadly two types of let's say, regulatory professionals who are required to deliver an effective process here. And you can see them probably in your own organisation. There's the local person who gathers the information, interprets it and passes up. And then there's what we would call a regulatory project manager, who is sitting above a number of countries and turning the micro data into a macro project plan. And as you mentioned, Krisztina, different countries, different timelines, different processes, but most clinical trials are multi-country, so there has to be one overall project plan to deliver that, with all the little pieces that add up to an effective plan.
Is it something that we can learn from the big major agencies? Do you think that Asia can learn from EMA or the US FDA? Or
I think again, most of the regulatory authorities in this part of the world have an ongoing relationship with EMA and FDA over many years, and from that they're learning the principles of good regulatory practice in the area of approval for clinical trials. Let's not forget that although European Union has got a harmonised regulatory procedure for marketing applications, they do not yet have a fully harmonised regulatory process for approval of clinical trials, so it's still national procedure, albeit a common core package. And I think over time this is something that I think Asian authorities will have to look at and learn from, because the document and data requirements for many Asian countries are in some cases significantly above what is required in Europe, and it's over time gaining the confidence to believe that a trial can be approved with maybe less data than is needed today and more in line with ICH countries.
Thank you very much. So I would like to move to our next topic, which is mapping direction and identifying areas of improvement. And so basically, there are many initiatives ongoing in Asia-Pacific region. We have the APEC, we have the three-party discussions ongoing regarding clinical data requirements, and also there is another interesting initiative between the China FDA and the Taiwan Health Authority. It's called Cross-Trade, and I would like Mr. Chang to talk about that initiative and what it means and how the agencies are getting closer.
Okay, thank you. I think that in my everyday job, and I think that the regulation for IND should be stay in our law and all the guidance or points to consider. And the authorities had a dual role to dual responsibility to protect public health and promote public health in R&D review. So, and we have the cross-trade cooperation and cooperation agreement with China, and we will focus on focus on the encourage in exchange and cooperation based on the principle of quality and reciprocity in following areas. One is to prevent and control of communicable disease and safe administration and the research and the development of medicinal products. And in the agreement, Article 13 is the harmonization of the regulation in drug development under the universal recognize the IND standard such as ICH. And Article 14 is the cooperation in clinical trial, and we will make more discuss about the clinical trial cooperation with the SFDA.
Thank you. Yes? Okay, so I think, I mean, as a regulatory lead in this area, I think our desire and you know, how we can really get accelerated approval, how we can, regarding the local clinical data requirements, how can one country's clinical data really satisfy the other countries' requirements, just like in the US and Europe, where you don't really need patients from the US in order to get approval in the US and vice versa, if you can justify that the patient population is representative to the country. So I think there are lots of initiatives ongoing, and it's like a long-term process, and I think we will require some more follow-ups. And I think seeing these initiatives moving along, I think I really hopeful that it will get us to the right direction, and hopefully one day we can use the Taiwan data for China and vice versa, and then the Japan data for Korea in submissions. So the next topic I really would like to touch base on how we can expedite new drug approvals in Asia, and I really would like to hear our representative from the agency. So I would like to understand the agency's direction. So what do you see at the Taiwan FDA directions regarding expediting drug approvals in your country?
I think that the review process should be transparent, efficient, and responsive, and run under standard operating procedures with a good quality assurance and the control system in place. And the review principle should be consistent and fair to all stakeholders. For the regulatory agency to approve a specific indication, carrying specific labeling, a large amount of clinical data needs to be submitted through a series of IND clinical development. As all INDs have different level of built-in risk for trial subjects, the regulatory agencies has to protect public health and promote public health in IND review. So I think the first role of regulatory agencies to protect public health, And all individual INDs should be carefully reviewed by the agency based on sound study design with good risk-benefit ratio, preclinical data, and ethical concern, informed consent, and safety measurements to decide whether it is safe to proceed. The second role of the agency is to promote public health in Taiwan. The sponsor is encouraged to seek any early regulatory advice, such as through a pre-IND meeting and end of phase 2 meeting with TFDA. Before making critical decisions for the drug development plan to avoid the potential regulation surprise during the final NDA review.
So basically in Taiwan, we have the accelerated approval of the clinical trials. That's correct. So you have a shorter approval time if there is a major country already approved the clinical study, and also you have and other agencies like Korea and I think China, they have consultations. Some of them are formal, some of them are informal, but you can use the agency to get some preliminary feedback to reduce the risk for the clinical study for the registration. And is it anything that your agency is doing to support the development of an Asia-specific disease, like in Asia it's gastric cancer is very prevalent? Is that something that the agency is doing to support the development of such disease, the drugs to get approval in Asia?
Yes, I think it's some disease is focused in the Asia, and I think that we have in-house full-time review and external advisory committee, and then we will judge which disease is the major point. So we have different review process, and such as full review, abbreviated review, and the clinical trial notification system.
Thank you. So I would like to move to our third topic, which is developing platform to enhance communications between the regulators and industry. And basically there are two things: what the industry can do, what the individual company can do, and also how the agency is embracing this communication or the platforms that the industry is trying to develop. So basically, from the industry standpoint, as you talked about before, there are many initiatives, and also there are roundtable discussion, and I think I hope that this will be increasing in the future, the roundtable discussion between the industry and the agencies, and hope that during these roundtable discussions we can learn, and we can learn from each other in Asia, and then we can share the best practices. And from the company perspective, I would really invite Yamin to talk about what is your company doing to enhance the communication.
Okay, well, thanks, Krisztina. I hope you can hear me all right. I'd like to break up this topic into 3 parts, and maybe I'll pause in between and ask the rest of you to comment, or the audience to comment. The first point that I think is ultimately important for us is to build relationship with the health authorities, and trust is the beginning of any relationship. So at Bayer, what we really advocate, and this is a general operating principle for us, is to be transparent with health authorities. And what we do is one global voice and one global message across all health authorities to all countries around the globe, and especially when it concerns about patient safety. And I can give you one example that happened late last year concerning a class of oral contraceptive drugs that Bayer markets around the globe. It's the drospirenol-containing oral contraceptive drugs. We had a discussion with the European authority, and there was identified risk of increased venous thrombosis with this class of drugs. which is already described, in our opinion, quite adequately in the product label around the globe. The EMEA, the European authority, did not agree with us fully, so we were basically asked to implement a labeling change in our European label. So you can imagine we certainly negotiate with the health authority to hope to come to an agreement. We were not able to do it at the end, so we respectfully disagree, but we complied to the European authority's request. What we did afterwards is that it's very clear from a company perspective that the overall benefit risk of this class of drug has not changed, and we don't see a need to implement any change to our company core data sheet. What we carried out in terms of communication around the globe is that we drafted a global template to inform health authorities around the globe about this development in Europe, but stating very clearly that we, at this point, do not intend to change our product label around the globe. As you can imagine, when you carry out such an action, that some authorities might come back to you and say, well, we want the same change to be done to the local label as well. And we did get such requests. So we carried out that action knowing that there might be requests that we have to carry out further negotiations. But I think with the transparency in mind, and that we're not hiding anything to any authority around the globe about the safety information about our product is what pushed us to take that direction. And at the end, we were actually quite happy that we were able to convince the majority of the authorities that our label is still adequately describing the profile, the benefit risk profile of this drug. So this is one operating principle that we have, and I wonder, this is what we carry out at Bayer, and how does BMS do it, and then how does the TFDA view such an approach?
Yes, we have had similar experience, and also the transparency is our, it's our guiding principle as well.
Yeah, so one challenge we face when we try to roll this out to the countries that yes, you can imagine some resistance in some countries to say that, my goodness, no other companies are doing this. If we go there and talk to our health authority, they might think that there's something horribly wrong with this drug. And we do respect the local country colleagues' opinion in a very much case-by-case situation. And there are in some countries, and the authorities are quite overwhelmed with much more pressing work, and they do not prefer to receive such an information. In those specific cases, we did respect a local country decision and not to inform. But in the vast majority of the markets around the globe, we carried out such an action. I don't know, Mr. Zhang, do you have any comments about that?
In my opinion, about transparency may provide assurance on safety safeguards to the public and increase our confidence in the system and predictably for the industry. In Taiwan, this information will include the approval basis of a product, approval time, summary of approval for the product, and our advisory committee member and the meeting dates. And the information may be made available through our official journal, periodical publication, or on our website. And most important of all, any disapproval of IND or NDA should be give clear reasons to the sponsor. And the sponsor can check the progress of their IND review on the internet. If the sponsor has questions about the disapproval for IND, they can request a free face-to-face consultation with our office to clarify any question, and the request for a meeting will be granted within 2 weeks.
Thank you. So my second point is Krisztina, coming back to your idea of promoting communication, and this is more about product or project-specific communication. And Mr. Zhang, you raised that point as well. Certainly in Asia, I feel, coming from a U.S. background and coming to Asia for now roughly about a year, I definitely recognize there's a lot more informal discussions ongoing between the sponsor and the health authority. It just definitely happens a lot more frequently compared to the U.S. and the European practice. And I really like that. I mean, the hesitation there is that, well, you get a lot of advice, but can you go with it? Because it's not written down, it's not carved in stone. So we do seek such frequent informal consultations with the health authority as much as we can, but we do take it back and we digest it very carefully to see how much do we want to rely on that to make our development decisions. So another interesting point that you raised, and I know we talked about it last night as well, is about going early, going to get consultation early. This is clearly done in US and Europe. And we see, those two agencies, and actually more and more with the PMD as well, those key agencies as the leading authorities in driving where we take our drug, how do we do our drug development. So, and I'm hearing from you about pre-IND consultation and the phase 2, these more formalized process now in Taiwan. And I did raise my concern with you last night, and I said, oh, gee, if we go to all over the world, then we get all the advice so early, and they're not the same. What should we do? So I think this does pose some challenges to the industry, but I do like the idea, the fact that nobody likes surprises, and you don't want to be at the end of the day to get a marketing authorization package, and you never had any input in it. So I can definitely understand the perspective from the TFDA. But I think within industry, or definitely within our company, we need to carefully consider that how early we want to go to take an individual drug for a consultation to agencies around the globe. I think for Asian-specific diseases, definitely there's a need to talk more to the Asian authorities because it definitely, as you said, public health, it impacts this region a lot more. And so this is something that we will definitely be doing. I also raised one idea to you, and then I think you liked that idea last night, is that as a company, we are very much interested in sharing our drug development pipeline with the authorities. And you made a very nice point to say that that as an agency, you like to know what industry is thinking. The truth is, for us in regulatory affairs and working in drug development, we like to know what you're thinking. So this is what we do all the time. We read, we look at precedents, we talk to each other, we try to predict what you're thinking, and the same idea or the principle applies to you as well, that you like to know what we're thinking. So this is something that we like to do, we have not done very much yet, is to bring our pipeline to talk to you and to give you the idea or the history behind and the background, the science that we do, and the disease we're interested in treating, and the drugs that we're interested in bringing to your country.
So also at BMS we do something similar. We approach the regulatory agencies and we try to do some information sharing meetings with them, based on the topic they are interested in, like personalized medicine, or we had a meeting organized with China CDA in the oncology division, talk about early clinical trials and biomarker selection. So this is something that I think our company is trying to do to enhance communication between the industry and the regulators. And the feedback we received from the agencies that they found it very helpful. And even we talked about in the US there are cooperative groups who can run clinical studies in rare diseases, and we gave some presentation to the regulatory authorities on that topic. So and also I think the last point is we have 10 minutes left, and I really would like to also ask the audience whether they have any question. But the last point I just want to mention that we are really hoping that the agencies in Asia will be much more sharing information among each other, because what we have seen in the US and EMEA, that they really share information since they are under confidentiality. I hope that one day, if the Korean Health Agency asks for a Japanese PMDA meeting minutes, they can really ask the PMDA directly, and they can share information. And I think I have seen that the Korean Health Agency actually went and attended a PMDA meeting most recently. So I think things are happening, and the agencies are sharing information more widely than before. So I would like to finish it here, and we have 9 minutes left, and I would like to open up for the audience for questions.
Hello. I'm representing pharmaceutical industry, and this topic is a very important one. And I would like you to describe more more on the process of initiating the clinical trials, the process between CRO and industry regarding regulatory, of course, and not only approval of clinical trials, but also approval of results of clinical trials for receiving FDA approval for the drug, meaning that it's very important for us in the beginning to know that the scope of these clinical trials will be approved and sufficient to receive final approval for the drug by FDA. So who is actually doing the major part in talks with our regulators, CRO or pharmaceutical industry?
Okay, well I
Yes,
try to answer that. I don't think there's one answer to that. Very broadly speaking, industry, when they use CRO, they contract for a particular service, and the key to an efficient process is to understand who is doing what. In fact, that's the most important thing. Who is applying for the approval from the regulatory authority? Who is preparing the documents for that? Who is preparing the documents for ethics committee approval? In which countries? At what time? How often are they talking? So and I'm talking broadly here, but this is probably applying to all CROs or any contract organisation. When you make the contract on a project, it's got to be very clear who is doing what, how often are they talking, what is the overall plan, and then regular communication. In most cases, up until the time the sites in a particular country start to recruit or enroll patients, at least in that time period, there's probably a weekly discussion between the CRO and the sponsor to understand, exactly what's happening, and it's further complicated by different countries. And when you think of why does a sponsor go to CRO? There are many reasons, but one reason that a sponsor comes to CRO for help in Asia is that the sponsor does not understand Asia. Maybe the sponsor is not present in Asia. So the key role there of the CRO, firstly, is to explain what is needed in Asia, not just in terms of how many subjects you need in a clinical trial for China to ultimately get the regulatory approval, which may come as a surprise to a sponsor who've never been in Asia before, how long it will take, what are the document requirements, how long they would take, what about translations, etc., etc., etc. So there is a kind of a getting to know one another period as well, and sometimes the explaining of the requirements, the timeline, the process, those things I mentioned before, is a difficult exercise for CRO with the, let's call it the naive sponsor, naive to the region. Does that start to answer your question? I could talk a lot longer, but that's broadly it. Yeah.
And also from the company perspective, actually, BMS, we have done both. When the CRO represented us even with the health agency, and then where we kept the health authority engagement point, it was done by BMS. So I think it also depends on the CRO and especially how the roles are defined in the contract. Any other question? Yes.
Thank you. My name is Tony Lee from a company called Medipost from Seoul, Korea. We actually manufacture adult allogenic stem cell product that was recently approved as a BLA marketable product by Korean FDA 2 months ago. My question is to the Taiwan FDA, whether the FDA has any framework, or it's being formulated, or do you have one in place that where you can actually assess the product and the clinical data that was produced and approved by the foreign regulatory affairs, in this case in particular KFDA. And the second question is, I think I missed that point where there's a potential partnership or some sort of collaboration going on with the SFDA China and the Taiwan FDA at the moment. It may have a relevance to this question, but then does China, to your knowledge, have any framework, or do you have anything that is in progress of forming in some sort of coherence or some sort of consistency?
Okay, thank you. And we just reviewed the sale product in 2010, and it's the job that belongs to Department of Health, Bureau of Medical Affairs, and they shipped this review possibility to TFDA, and we had the somatic cell and genetic cell guideline draft, and we will finalize maybe this year. And we have the checking list, and we need some IND or IND data. Then you will follow our draft. And the other question is about China.
So basically the question was whether you would accept the review of the KFDA, but what you are saying, you have your own guidance document, your own requirements that the company will need to meet for the Taiwan approval of that product. And the second question was regarding the collaboration between the China Health Authority and the Taiwan.
Yes, because we have a lot of discuss with this point, but I cannot talk too much.
I think it's still a work in progress, and it remains to be seen how it will proceed. I think it's very similar to the three-party discussions.
Yes, because we focus on two.
The principles first.
Yes, one is the principle, and another one is the data of clinical trial, and it's a big issue, and we discuss with SFDA.
Thank you. I think one more question.
Thank you very much for a very interesting discussion. I really like that. I understand that individual company approaching to regulatory agency for having two-way communication. But my question is that, is there any initiative from the industry where industry representatives from various companies like pharma or CRO have face-to-face discussion with individual regulatory agencies to specifically nailing down issues specific to that regulatory agencies, like maybe KFDA or something related to DCGI in India or Taiwan FDA?
I personally, I admit I don't know. Alistair, do you have any?
Just briefly, you want to add something as well, but I think this is quite well developed in many of the, not every country, but many of the countries in this region where industry is organized in trade association. Often those trade associations have got a regulatory or a scientific or a medical committee. The companies are coming together discussing new guidelines or issues like you say. Often there is a proper formal engagement between that committee and the regulatory authority to discuss new guidelines. It's a lot more sophisticated and developed than it was 5 or 10 years ago, and I think it will continue to be in the future.
But I think it's within the country. So each country, as you said, each country has a own pharma association, and they work very closely with the individual health agency. I mean, I know in Korea the KRPA works very closely with the health authority, and they invite them to their meetings. So I think it's an ongoing effort. I think it depends. I think individual countries may have different frequency of meeting, but I think they're getting
happens almost everywhere in Asia, where this two-way dialogue.
Yes. So thank you very much. I think we are still on time, and I think we can move on to our next presentation. Thank you. Thanks for the audience.
Thank you very much.